Hello once again, and this is Jay McCluskey, and we are on our final study from the book of Deuteronomy. And as we begin, I want to thank you. If you're watching this, you've made it through a long journey of these teachings here from my study in my home. We're glad that you've shared with us, and we get to the end of the story. Most of Deuteronomy is about the teaching to the people, Moses' farewell addresses, but this is kind of the farewell of Moses here as we complete the story of his life. It has been said that every true story ends in death, and that's true. We're all a day closer than we were yesterday to that inevitability. We hope that the closing story of our life is going to be something that is uplifting and inspirational. It'll be sad, of course, but there will also be that which will be inspiring about it. I told you last week about my friend Tim Perrin and his father, Harold Perrin, who died a few years ago. And when Mr. Perrin passed away in the hospital, the family was all around him. They were praying together, reading scripture, singing hymns. And some friends were out in the hallway. And when the hospital door opened up and Mr. Perrin had passed, the family comes out, and the folks who observed it said they came out, they had tears in their eyes and smiles on their faces, and said, wow, that's it, isn't it? That is a sad but joyful and uplifting and inspiring story that takes place. And that's what we find here with Moses. I call this, on your outline, you can see I call it Leaving Well. And I hope you picked up an outline from the church office or from our website. And that's what we want to do. We want to leave well in our world. I think Moses is a good example of one of those. It was a sad departure for him and also for the people, but it's also inspiring as we look over the story. So let's see what we can find in how he leaves this world as characteristics of how, hopefully, not every story's as inspiring as Moses, but hopefully that would be something that we would strive for. So the first thing that we're going to look at is say, leave on time. And I really mean that there's a completion to the purpose and the calling on Moses' life. When I say on time, I don't mean everybody has a time that is already predetermined that they're going to die. I don't believe that, and as I always say, neither do you, because you look both ways before you cross the street. And if you believed really there was just a time, and if it wasn't your time, then nothing's going to hit you. So we do things to make sure we preserve our time. So I don't mean by that, but I do mean the idea of that he kind of understood his purpose. God's calling for his life had come to its closure in a timing kind of way. When Moses went out and spoke these words to all the people, I am 120 years old. I am no longer able to lead you. The Lord has said to me, you will not cross the Jordan. So this is kind of it. My leadership time has come. I'm no longer able, that he says. So we'll see here in a moment. He still had a lot of his wits and his physical strength that is about him. But it was kind of the right timing for this to take place. I put a little note there, said you can fill in the blank. I'm not afraid of dying. I am afraid of living too long. And Moses, one you can say, boy, he didn't live too long. He didn't outlive his usefulness and then become just kind of an idle burden upon the people. He lived the length of life that seemed to be prescribed for the purpose that was his life. And it says 120 years old when he died, yet his eyes were not weak nor his strength gone. And that's impressive, isn't it? So, he kind of leaves on his own steam, as it might be said. He had reached his finish. Paul is finishing up his ministry, and he writes to Timothy, and he says, I have kept the faith, and I have run the course. I have finished the race. So he finished. And Jesus talked about, even at 33 years old, the night of his arrest, the night before his crucifixion, he says this in this prayer in John 17, I brought you glory on earth by finishing the work you gave me to do. Boy, that would be a great way. That would be finishing well. And you say, I did what God wanted me to do. I finished that work. Wasn't all the work that needed to be done, but it was the work that God wanted me to do. And there was a sense of closure that takes place that speaks well. Second, leave with succession. That I mean is you get to hand the leadership off. The people aren't without leadership. They're going to have a good leader. The leader's going to be Joshua. And it says in Deuteronomy 31, it's part of the closing of Moses' life. Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the presence of all of Israel. So, you get a very public handoff of responsibilities. Be strong and courageous, for you must go with this people into the land the Lord swore to their ancestors to give them, and you must divide it among their inheritance. Here's the task that you have. And what we have here in the Bible, this story, is one of the almost seemingly seamless transitions of power from one leader over to the next. And it's kind of a rare thing. So it's a pretty rare thing in life. So Moses to Joshua, we'll see later that there is Elijah the prophet to Elisha to be the prophet. Jesus handing off the ministry of the gospel to the disciples. Paul raising up Timothy in a sense of, you take things there. So that is a meaningful thing. I pastored the same church, for 35 years. And over that time, you have these pillars in the church who pass away. And there's a part that how can our church exist? How can we go on without that person there? And yet there's an inspiring aspect when people step up and someone fills in the void and takes some leadership roles. And it's an amazing thing. We grieve the loss of these great people in our contributors and servant leaders of our church, but we're also grateful for those who raise up and help out. I know some years ago, not too many, when I walked down the hallway where our children's Sunday school classes meet, just about every leader in those 1st through 5th grade classes were retirement age or beyond. And so that kind of thinks, hey, this is a great group of folks, but they're some of our senior members. And now when I walk down the hallway of our children's ministry, we have one retirement age lady who's still teaching, but all those other classes have transitioned into some other younger leadership, including some college students who are helping out. So that's inspiring, because here's some folks, when the time came, there was succession. Thing could get handed off to capable people, and the ministry rolls on and continues. So having some good succession, it takes place. Third, leave good instructions. Boy, it's part of the legacy of your life is what you leave for folks to share. And notice it says here, Moses wrote down this law and gave it to the Levitical priests. And I'll just pause there and just say he's writing things down. Moses is credited traditionally by being the author of the first 5 books of the Bible. So we remember Moses not only as a great lawgiver, but here remembered he's a great law preserver. And we're grateful, it's not just the words we say orally have an impact, but they have a shelf life. They don't last as long as a written word does. If I have some regrets in my years, I wish I'd written more in a context that people could just pick up and read. My notes are a little rough for anybody just to sit down and read, and maybe in retirement, because it takes me blocks of time. I'll write some things that are preserved a little bit more. He tells them of these words in Deuteronomy 32. Take to heart all the words I've solemnly declared to you this day, so that you may command your children to obey carefully all the words of this law. We have this theme again in Deuteronomy of the responsibility of passing this along to your children. Thank goodness it's written down so that you can have it and read it for yourself and for their benefit. They are not just idle words for you, they are your life. Boy, there's a phrase. These aren't idle words. Some things are more light reading, right? But boy, not this. This is your life. By them you will live long in the land you are crossing the Jordan to possess. And we have been talking about the blessings and cursings and putting before them last week about choosing life and death. And you have those options that are before you. But boy, that's things that are going to outlive you, preserve you, tell your story, and continue on. And it reminded me of a couple of things that are the labors of love of my parents. Some years ago, my mom started writing her memoirs, and every year she would write about a different decade in her life. You can see she just wrote it by hand, laid them on a copier, and made copies in these little booklets. And what a treasure! That's something that you can know about her story, and her children's children's children can know about those things. And here of late, my dad started this Easter season leading up to it in Lent, the season of Lent, writing devotionals, posting them online. He got a good following of people who are reading just a simple daily devotional, and working on getting them. He's working on getting them printed in a better format, but I put them together in a little devotional booklet there. And again, just something that is going to be reflective of his heart and communicate and last longer than he does. So those are the good instructions that get left. The next thing, leave a legacy with God. Even more so than the people, is the legacy that Moses has left with God. The Lord said to Moses, "You are going to rest with your ancestors." Here's the closure, the timing. "These people will soon prostitute themselves to the foreign gods of the land that they are entering. They will forsake me and break the covenant I make with them." Boy, that's a little discouraging. Moses, you poured your heart and soul into these people. You've been warning them about idolatry and pagan cultures, and pretty soon they're going to buy into it. But it doesn't say like, okay, Moses, you're a failure for that. He's not remembered. His legacy is not as a failure. His legacy with God is he's very successful. One of the great, top few people in all of the Bible, of course, would be Moses. He had the responsibility, this high responsibility of working with people, and people can be a challenging medium to work with. If you are going to write a song and it becomes a beautiful song, a legacy song, your signature song, it's pretty much going to stay the same forever and ever. The styles may change of how it's performed, but it's pretty much the same melody. If you write a poem or you write a book, long into the future, those words are going to lay out in the same way and be the same. If you are a builder or an architect and you build a beautiful building, and long after you're gone, that building stands pretty much the way it was when you built it. But people are fickle, and you pour yourself into them and shape them in one way, and then they decide to go another. And boy, that's just the nature of it. And I like the idea that Moses, even though we can find here the Hebrew people are going to compromise their faith in God, they're going to go in pursuit of some of the other pagan ways around them. Moses is remembered because he has this great legacy with God. So leave the legacy with God. And then finally come to that point where it says we leave the world, that moment of departure that comes. We go through the valley of the shadow of death, and we enter into our eternal home in heaven. On that day, the Lord told Moses, "Go up into the Abraham range to Mount Nebo in Moab, across from the Jordan, and view Canaan, the land I am giving the Israelites as their own possession. There on the mountain you will have climbed, you will die and be gathered to your people, just as your brother Aaron died on Mount Hor and was gathered to his people." And so, Moses began his ministry on a mountaintop. It was the calling of God and the burning bush story, and here he's finishing his ministry on a mountaintop. And I put this note, this is pretty good when your death can be a mountaintop experience. We have those in life. We don't tend to have those in death, but boy, that's dying well, and that's an inspiring moment that he takes place. Now, I have been up Mount Nebo a couple of times on tours to the Holy Land, and riding on a bus in this roads that do these switchbacks and forth as it climbs this very steep terrain to get to the top. And I remember thinking up there, I know why Moses died up here. He's exhausted from this climb. He's 120 years old. Maybe some of that was the case, but that's a beautiful closure that he has there. Oh, I also mentioned, talks about Aaron dying on Mount Hor, which is down in southern Jordan, near the lost city of Petra. And they point out, here's Mount Hor, and there's a little chapel on top. It's way in the distance, and you can't even imagine how they got construction teams and materials up there to build a chapel to honor Aaron. Aaron died the same way. He got up there, and he didn't want to come back down. He was exhausted. So that may be some conjecture that takes place in there. But look, he says, there he showed him the whole land. This is the inspiring mountaintop experience. Gilead, Dan, Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the Mediterranean Sea, the Negev, the whole region of the valley of Jericho, the Sea of Palms as far as Zor. And I will attest to you, I have stood on top of Mount Nebo and looked and you can see a long way. And I like to think God gave Moses a really clear day because he could see exceptionally long day. In the far distance when I was there, you could see Jerusalem. It's many miles away. And the Mediterranean Sea was that much further away. And it says you could see the Mediterranean Sea. But boy, just that grasp of the mass land that was before him. You know, it says a great phrase there of Moses. It's not of every character in the Bible, but it's there enough times that I note it and I refer to it. He says they were gathered to their people. That's one of the ways death is described. You gather to your people. And we get from that, and we find hope in that. That this is a great homecoming when we leave this world. You know, if you've lived long in life, then you know more people in heaven than you do on earth. So we celebrate that about the reunions that take place in eternity when the time comes that we gather into our people when we leave this world. Next, leaving on God's terms. Now, if you ask Moses how he wanted to close his life, it wasn't going to be on Mount Nebo, even though that's kind of an inspiring story. He wanted to go into the promised land, but was denied that, and that is mentioned about why he's not going. This is because both of you broke faith with me in the presence of the Israelites at the waters of Meribeth Kadesh in the desert of Zin, and because you did not uphold my holiness among the Israelites, therefore you will see the land only from a distance and will not enter the land I'm giving the people of Israel. So there's God's word to Moses saying this is why you're not going into the promised land. It goes back to Numbers chapter 20, the story where God told Moses in a time when the people were wandering, they needed water. He said, speak to the rock and it would bring forth water. Instead, Moses kind of makes a show of things, talks about how stubborn these people are, and strikes the rock and doesn't uphold the holiness of God, kind of upholds himself about that takes place and dramatizes the event. And as a consequence of that, this is how Moses' story ends, really on God's terms, more than the way he wanted, because we see that Moses tried to bring this back up a few times after that consequence was prescribed to him. At that time I pleaded with the Lord, Sovereign Lord, you have begun to show your servant your greatness and your strong hand. For what God is in heaven on earth can do the deeds that your mighty works can do, works you do. Let me go over and see the good land beyond the Jordan, the fine hill country and Lebanon. I want to see it for myself, right? Verse 26, but because of you, he's speaking to the people there, the Lord was angry with me and would not listen to me. That is enough, the Lord said. I do not speak any more about this matter. I use that text sometimes. That's earlier in Deuteronomy, but it's about this event at the end of his life. I use that text sometimes to say there's times not to pray. And one of the times not to pray is when God's already given the answer. So he says, don't bring this up anymore. And there's an indication here in the Hebrew language that Moses is asking repeatedly. This was something, maybe that's when God finally says, you can keep asking, but don't, because the answer is going to be the same. This is all decided. Now, I like this little note I put here at the bottom, and that's to say, when did Moses finally arrive in the Holy Land? Because he was born in Egypt, right? Baby Moses in the bulrushes. We know that story. He was born in Egypt. He was in the backside of the desert, wandering in the wilderness, but he never got into Canaan, okay, until when? He finally arrived. And it's a story. It's in Matthew 17 and Luke 9. It's the story of Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John, the inner circle of three, and they go and see Jesus. He's glorified. He's seen like he's in pure white. And joining him there at the mountaintop is Elijah for the prophets and Moses the law. And at least in that divine state, Moses in a tangible way in this world is in the Holy Land. He makes it 1,500 years into the future, but still he makes that, and so that's makes you feel good when you can sense that that desire is finally met. A couple more closing things. One is leave your remains. We leave our earthly bodies, right? And our spirit, our soul, our essence continue on in eternity, a new body. But these earthly bodies, so we get some verses in the Bible about the human remains of Moses. Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. He buried him in Moab in the valley opposite Beth Peor, but to this day, no one knows where his grave is. And that seems to be the desire of God. We're going to bury Moses quietly and secretly. Now you move to the New Testament book of Jude, and really Jude is trying to tell the people there of being respectful to others, especially maybe even those in leadership. And as an example of even showing regard, he uses this dispute that they have a tradition about between the archangel Michael and Satan fighting over Moses' body. Even the archangel Michael, when he was disputing with the devil about the body of Moses, did not dare to condemn him for slander, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." Boy, that's an interesting verse. And it brings up the tradition I said a moment ago. It's not in the Bible. It is in a collection of books called the Apocrypha. And a book within the Apocrypha is called the Assumption of Moses. And they talk about this battle that goes on between Michael the archangel and Satan the devil over the body of Moses. Somehow that Satan wanted to use Moses' body, not bury it in a secret hidden place, but in some way. I wonder, this is speculative, that maybe he wanted to say, if we get the people to build a shrine at Moses' grave, it will distract them from worshiping the one true God, and they'll be more focused on this person than they will the one true God. So there may be some doings that go with this, and Michael is trying to make sure that God's will is taken care of. And he does it in a way that he doesn't boast of himself, but he says, "The Lord rebuke you." And so there's a bit of the handling of that, how Michael did, that is in there. So boy, that's an interesting text. And one of those we studied this in the class for this lesson. I said, boy, we'll just have to ask the Heavenly Father about that when we get to heaven. One of those things we'll understand better there. Final note here after Moses passing away and his burial has taken place is you go, leave your grief. Death is a sorrowful thing. And it tells us there in this note in Deuteronomy 34, the Israelites grieved for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days until the time of weeping and mourning was over. And so there's this time that's kind of shut down. And emotionally, we got to go and process some grief. And 30 days may not be enough. We get through a memorial service and a funeral service and some burial services for people, for the survivors, for the family. They got to transition themselves back into some life, and emotionally that's a tough thing to go through. More than 30 days, I think, but it just makes the point that grief doesn't come to stay, but it does take some time to process through. I've always liked this idea, when you go through a visitation time at a funeral service, and you sign a book, so let them know I was here. I came by to honor, pay my respects. And I want to say, when I die, don't put a book out there, put a calendar and have people sign a day. Everybody sign the next day. Remember your day, and my desire would be, and pray for my family on that day. And if you really love me, contact my family on that day and say, how are you doing? I know this is tough, and whatever it may be, so there's that routinely knowing people are praying for and you remembering it, and the grief process is working on its way. The verse from the Psalms 116 there at your bottom of your outline, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. I use that a lot in funeral services. In our sight, death, it takes someone away. It's separation. It's sad. It's sorrowful. But boy, you think God's sight, boy, I get to welcome one of my loved ones home. Our relationship is going to a deeper, newer, exciting, glorified level it wouldn't otherwise. No wonder it's precious in the eyes of the Lord. And so remembering that the way we see things isn't the only way to see things, that eternity has a different perspective on that. 3 little notes at the bottom just to kind of summarize Moses' life and what we've seen throughout this study. One is Moses was faithful to walk with God. He spoke candidly with God, spoke to God as you would speak to a friend, and had a deeper relationship of communication back and forth. And so we admire that about him. He was faithful to speak for God. Take what God says, pass it along to the people. That wasn't always an easy message. Sometimes that's the way it is, but you be faithful to speak God's word. And last, he is faithful to the people. You know, there's times God introduces the idea, I'm going to start over with you, Moses. These people, let's just strike them down, leave them in the desert. Let's go on, just me and you, and we'll build a new nation. He says, no, stay with these people. And he gives reasons and things. And you just admire that Moses humble enough to say he didn't seek his own glory so much as to say, no, these are backward people and they've given trouble and they're difficulties, but stay with them and continue to show grace. And he was an advocate for the people of God. So we're grateful to have those folks. Boy, who's been an advocate for you in your life? Give them a second chance. Stay with them, offering some forgiveness and things. That is Moses. So that's been our study. Again, I thank you for joining with us. I hope it's been a meaningful thing as we've reminded of our walk with the Lord, our devotion to the Lord. Deuteronomy 6, to love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and strength. Teaching that to our children, knowing that before us, God offers us some paths, and where we end up determines on which paths we choose. And so choose well, choosing seeking to following the Lord. And our stories go, and hopefully to a closure that, while some sadness to it, is overall an inspiring tale. This is Jay McCluskey. Thank you for following us through Deuteronomy. The Lord bless you and keep you. God bless.